The first thing I noticed about Caleb Monroe was the glass of water. Not his face, not the gray beginning at his temples, not the fact that almost everyone in the conference room straightened a little when he walked in, the way people do around someone whose name appears on the building directory. It was the water. He entered with a folder tucked under one arm, paused beside an empty chair, and set a clear glass down next to it, before taking his own seat. Such a small thing. My body recognized it before my mind did. For 1 second, the bright conference room vanished, and I was back beneath hospital lights 6 years earlier, with my mother's glasses folded in my palm and a paper cup sweating against my knee.
Elliot Brooks,
Maya said beside me.
our new senior brand strategist.
Caleb looked across the table. Hey, there are people you forget after years of knowing them, and people your memory keeps with unreasonable precision after only a few hours. Caleb belonged to the second kind. He looked older than he had that night, so did I. His hair was shorter, his face a little leaner. The tiredness around his eyes had changed. But I knew him. I knew the steady way he held eye contact without making it feel like a challenge. I knew the faint line between his eyebrows when he was listening. I knew the hands that had once placed water beside me and then stayed empty, never reaching for me when I hadn't asked to be touched. Elliot, he said. Welcome to Halston Monroe. That was it. No pause long enough to mean anything. No flicker of recognition I could trust. I had chosen Halston Monroe because it was supposed to be a clean move. New company, better title, harder work. At 38, I liked decisions that could be explained in bullet points. Better salary, more creative control, shorter commute from my apartment in Ravenswood, assuming the trains behaved. I had spent most of my career helping companies sound more human than they really were, and Halston Monroe at least seemed interested in doing work that mattered. Their largest Chicago project was the Mercer Street redevelopment, an abandoned industrial block they planned to turn into mixed-income housing, neighborhood retail, and public space, instead of another glass tower no one nearby had asked for. I knew how to build a story around that. I did not know what to do with the man sitting 3 seats away from me. 6 years earlier, I hadn't known what to do with him either. My mother had collapsed at home on a Tuesday evening. A neighbor found her. By the time I got to the hospital, there were already too many people speaking gently. Doctors become careful with language when they know the truth is going to hurt, no matter how they arrange the words. Cerebral hemorrhage, severe, no meaningful response. We're doing everything we can. I remember nodding, as if I were being briefed on a difficult client. I called my aunt in Milwaukee. I found my mother's insurance card in the wrong pocket of her purse. I signed things nurses placed in front of me. I thanked everyone. I kept saying thank you, because it was easier than saying anything true. When the doctor finally came back, the world did not crack open. That was the strange part. The hallway stayed the same ugly beige. A television mounted in one corner continued showing a late-night weather report with the sound off. Someone down the hall laughed, then immediately lowered their voice. My mother was dead, and every object around me continued performing its function. I sat down because, for the first time in hours, there was nowhere I needed to be. The man who would become Caleb Monroe to me was sitting across the waiting area, with his sleeves pushed up and his phone face down between his hands. At some point, he disappeared. At some point, he came back carrying 2 paper cups of water. He put one on the chair beside me. I'm not thirsty, I told him. You don't have to be. Then he sat 3 seats away. That was most of our first conversation. He did not ask who had died. He did not tell me everything happened for a reason. He did not offer a story about his own grief, as if pain were a competition. When I finally said, "My mother," he nodded once. "I'm sorry." When I said I should probably go home, he said nothing. When I admitted almost an hour later, "If I stand up, I have to leave," he looked toward the elevator doors. "Then don't stand up yet." So I didn't. Back in the conference room 6 years later, Maya nudged a printed agenda toward me. I realized I had missed almost a minute of conversation. "You good?" she whispered. "Fine." The word came automatically. It usually did. I forced myself to focus. Mercer Street needed a revised public narrative before its next round of community meetings. The existing materials made the project sound polished and expensive, which was exactly the problem. People who had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years were not asking for polished. They were asking whether they would still recognize the place when the construction fences came down. When Maya invited me to speak, I said so. The current deck talks too much about what we're adding. It barely acknowledges what residents think they're losing. One of the architects shifted in his chair. We're preserving the original facade. I mean more than brick. The room went quiet in the productive way I liked. When people were deciding whether to argue or listen, Caleb leaned back slightly. What would you change first? For the first time since he entered, I forgot the hospital. Work was the one place I never had trouble knowing what I needed. I want interviews with longtime residents before we write another headline. Old photographs, former workers, business owners. I want to know which corner people use as a shortcut to school, and which storefront they still call by a name that disappeared 20 years ago. Right now, the project language makes us sound like we're arriving to create a neighborhood that already exists. By the time I finished, Maya was smiling. Caleb wasn't, but he was paying attention. Do it, he said. Afterward, Maya walked me through the office and introduced me to so many people that their names became a polite blur. I kept expecting Caleb to appear behind us. He didn't. That should have been a relief. Instead, I found myself replaying the way he had said my name. Maybe 6 years had mattered more to me, because grief had turned every detail of that night into something permanent. Maybe I had simply been one stranger among dozens to him. He had stayed until morning. He had walked me to the elevator. I remembered eventually asking why he was at the hospital, and him saying, "My dad." I remembered wanting to ask whether his father was okay, and realizing I had spent half a night beside someone without knowing his last name. Apparently, he had been easier to find than I thought. His name was on half the documents in my welcome packet. Late that afternoon, Maya dropped a thick Mercer Street file on my desk. Congratulations. You inherited the fun one. I was promised free snacks and reasonable expectations. You got a laptop and dental. Classic bait and switch, she laughed. Then she told me the partner group wanted me on Thursday's site visit. Caleb will be there. He's the executive sponsor. I looked down at the file so she wouldn't see anything change in my face. Caleb Monroe? She stared at me. We only have one. Right. He won't micromanage you. He hates that. I almost laughed at the irony of being reassured about a man who had once sat beside me for hours without asking a single question I didn't want to answer. By 6:30, most of the office had emptied. I stayed because first days are easier when you can turn them into work. I read neighborhood reports, old renderings, public meeting transcripts, transportation studies. At some point, someone left a mug of coffee beside my laptop. I assumed it was Maya until I tasted it and remembered why I normally avoided office coffee after 4. I pushed it away. When I finally stood to leave, the mug was gone. In its place was a bottle of water. I stared at it for a long time. No note, no message, nobody nearby. Across the office, Caleb's glass-walled door was closed, his lights already off. 6 years ago, I had told a stranger I wasn't thirsty. He had left the water beside me anyway. The next morning, the bottle was still there. I had left it on my desk on purpose, which was ridiculous. It was just water. Maybe Maya had put it there. Maybe facilities had. Maybe Halston Monroe employed an office ghost with excellent hydration habits. By 9:15, I had constructed enough reasonable explanations to fill a presentation. None of them explained why I kept looking through the glass walls toward Caleb's office. He arrived a little before 10, carrying rolled drawings under one arm while talking to an architect half his age about loading access. He did not look at me. That should have settled it. Instead, I spent the next hour irritated with myself for wanting proof of something I wasn't even sure I wanted to be true. The Mercer Street site sat west of the river, 3 blocks of old brick and corrugated metal, boxed in by fencing that had been tagged more than once. The main building had once housed a machine parts manufacturer. Now pigeons owned the upper windows, and weeds had forced their way through cracks in the loading yard. On Thursday morning, I met Maya, 2 architects, a community liaison named Denise, and Caleb beside the temporary gate. The day was colder than the forecast had promised. Caleb wore a charcoal coat, no tie, and work boots instead of dress shoes. Hard hat, Maya said, handing me one. I was hoping brand strategy had finally evolved past head protection. Not in construction. Caleb fastened his own chin strap. We're very traditional. It was the first joke I had heard him make. Inside, the building smelled like wet concrete, old metal, and dust. Denise walked us through the areas residents had asked the firm to preserve: the original brick arch over the south entrance, a faded union notice painted directly onto one interior wall, a row of high windows that caught afternoon light in a way the architectural rendering had somehow made less interesting. One of the architects suggested covering the painted notice because restoration would be expensive. Caleb didn't overrule him. He turned to Denise. "What does that sign mean to people here?" "My father worked in this building 29 years, she said. "That notice was there before I was born." Caleb looked at it again, then priced the restoration. No speech, no self-congratulation. He just moved on. I hated that I noticed. At the far end of the second floor, we entered a long room overlooking the street. Across the road, an older man was opening a corner store. He dragged a chalkboard sign onto the sidewalk and wedged folded cardboard underneath one leg to stop it rocking. "That's what the deck is missing," I said. Caleb had come up beside me. "Cardboard? The fact that people are already solving problems here." He followed my gaze. "We keep presenting Mercer Street as if nothing useful exists until we finish construction. It makes us the hero of a neighborhood that didn't ask to be rescued." Caleb was quiet. "Can you fix that without making the project sound apologetic?" "Yes." "How long?" 3 weeks. 1. "That's not how time works. It is in development. You people should put that on the website." The corner of his mouth moved. "Tuesday, Wednesday, Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday at 5, 4. You negotiate like a landlord. I've been called worse." By the time we left the building, I had forgotten to be self-conscious around him for almost 20 minutes. That bothered me more than the water. We spent the next several days gathering material. I interviewed business owners, renters, a retired machinist who still carried his employee badge from 1987 in his wallet, and 3 teenagers who used the fenced loading dock as a shortcut despite repeated warnings not to. Caleb was present for some of it. When he was there, he rarely took over. He knew when to speak and, more unusually, when silence would get us a better answer. During one community session, a resident accused the firm of using affordable housing as a public relations shield, while increasing property values around everyone who remained. One of the younger staff members started defending the financing model. Caleb stopped him with a small movement of his hand. "She's not asking how the financing works." The woman crossed her arms. "Then what am I asking? Whether we understand that people can be priced out even when their own rent doesn't change." She studied him. "Do you?" "Not enough yet." It wasn't a satisfying corporate answer. That was why it worked. Later, outside, I said, "You're surprisingly good at admitting you don't know things." He glanced at me. "Surprisingly? You have your name on the door. Statistically, that lowers the odds." He laughed. Not politely. It changed his whole face for a second, and I had the strange sensation of discovering a room in a house I thought I remembered. "You're less polite than you were 6 years ago," he said. The cold seemed to sharpen around us. He kept walking. I stopped. Caleb took 2 more steps before realizing I wasn't beside him. He turned. "What did you say?" He looked at me for a long second. Traffic moved behind him. Somewhere down the block, a truck backed up with a steady electronic beep. I said, "You're less polite than I expected." "No, you didn't." His eyes dropped briefly, the first sign of discomfort I had seen from him. Before he could answer, Denise called his name from the side entrance. Caleb looked toward her and then back at me. "We should talk." "Great. I enjoy talking." "Not here." "Of course not." We did not talk. For the rest of the afternoon, Caleb became so professionally appropriate that it bordered on parody. He copied Maya on an email he could have answered in person. He called me Brooks in front of the architects. He stood on the opposite side of every room. By the time I got back to the office, I was angry, although I couldn't have explained what outcome would have made me less angry. If he remembered, I wanted him to say so. If he didn't want to say so, I wanted to know why. Instead, I got a calendar invitation for a Tuesday strategy review. Tuesday became one of those days where every meeting ran 8 minutes over and somehow stole an hour. By 6, most people had gone home. Maya left with a warning not to romance the PowerPoint all night. I chose to interpret that professionally. Caleb and I ended up alone in the small project room, with printouts covering the table. I revised language while he reviewed budget notes. Someone had ordered coffee during the afternoon, and an untouched cup sat near my elbow, cold enough that a thin skin had formed across the surface. Caleb looked at it, then at me. You still don't drink it when you're nervous? The room went silent. This time, neither of us could pretend I had heard him wrong. I set down my pen. You remember. His expression changed, but only slightly. Yes. One word. 6 years of uncertainty, reduced to one word. I should have felt relieved. Instead, the first thing I felt was exposed. How long have you known? Since you walked into the conference room, and you said nothing. You were starting a new job. That's your explanation? It's part of it. What's the rest? Caleb closed the folder in front of him. The rest isn't a conversation I wanted to have while you were trapped in a room with your new employer. That's considerate. You sound angry. I'm deciding. A quiet breath left him that might have been amusement. I looked down at the cold coffee. So the water was you? Yes. Why? His eyes held mine. Because you still say you're fine too quickly. I didn't answer. He didn't push. After a moment, he turned the folder back toward me. The neighborhood advisory meeting moved up to Thursday. We'll both need to be there. I stared at him. That's it? For tonight. Convenient. Probably. He gathered his papers. At the door, he stopped. You were always better when you had something practical to do. Then he left. I sat alone in the project room, listening to the ventilation system hum above me. 6 years earlier, that man had known me for less than one night. Somehow, he still remembered the exact way I survived it. Over the next few weeks, Caleb and I developed a strange kind of truce. We acknowledged the hospital without discussing it. He stopped pretending not to remember me. I stopped acting as if his remembering was some kind of offense. What neither of us asked was the obvious question. Why had it mattered enough to survive 6 years? Instead, we worked. Mercer Street was moving too quickly for emotional archaeology. The next advisory meeting generated 12 new complaints, 3 useful suggestions, and 1 retired electrician named Mr. Alvarez, who told Caleb the proposed courtyard looked like a dentist's office trying to be a park. Caleb thanked him, wrote it down, and later asked the landscape team to rethink the seating. You know he was insulting you, I said as we walked toward the train afterward. He was insulting the courtyard. He was looking directly at you. That's how feedback works. I learned Caleb carried peppermints in the inside pocket of his coat because long construction meetings gave him headaches. He learned I rewrote presentation openings 3 times, even when version 1 was fine. I learned he hated voice notes and would rather type an entire paragraph with 1 thumb while standing in the rain. He learned I volunteered to take notes whenever a room became tense, because having something to do with my hands kept me from interrupting. None of those things should have felt intimate. That was the problem. The hospital had been extraordinary, a sealed-off night that belonged to grief. This was worse. This was ordinary. We were learning each other 10 minutes at a time. Elevator rides, bad printouts, arguments over words, peppermints, meetings that ran long. Our first real disagreement happened over a campaign line. I wanted to build the Mercer Street launch around the phrase, "built with the neighborhood." Caleb crossed it out. No, I stared at the red line through 3 days of work. Insightful. It claims something we haven't earned. We've spent 6 weeks interviewing residents. Listening is not the same as building with them. It's positioning copy, Caleb, not sworn testimony. That distinction is exactly why people distrust positioning copy. I wanted to be annoyed because he was being difficult. Unfortunately, he was right enough to be dangerous. I took the deck home, deleted the line, and came back the next morning with a new approach, based on residents' own language instead of ours. Caleb read it. Better. You're unbearable. Also better than the first version. I laughed before I could stop myself. Something changed after that. Not dramatically. He still copied Maya when he needed to. We still met in rooms with glass walls, where anyone could walk past. But the caution eased. He teased me about refusing to use the office printer without first threatening it. I started leaving peppermints on the conference table before long meetings, and pretending I had no idea where they came from. One evening, I found him alone in the project room at 8 o'clock. His jacket was off. His sleeves were rolled. He was staring at a spreadsheet like it had personally betrayed him. An untouched sandwich sat beside his laptop. No drink. When did you last have water? He looked up. That's a very specific accusation. Answer it. I had coffee. That's not water. It contains water. So does soup. I'm not letting you count soup. I went to the kitchenette, filled a glass, and set it beside his laptop. Caleb looked at the glass, then at me. For once, I knew exactly what memory had entered the room with us. I'm not thirsty, he said quietly. I leaned one hand on the table. You don't have to be. His expression changed. Almost nothing, but I saw the breath leave him. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The 6 years between those 2 glasses of water seemed to fold inward. Then Caleb looked down and smiled. Not his client smile, not his public smile. That was cheap. Effective, though. He picked up the glass and drank half of it. I sat across from him. We worked another hour. Neither of us mentioned what had just happened. The following week, Mercer Street brought in an outside urban planning consultant named Noah Grant. Noah was around my age, openly gay, confident without being exhausting, and funny in a way that didn't require effort from everyone else. During our first site walk, he looked at a proposed decorative fence and said, "Nothing says community like 6 feet of powder-coated exclusion." I laughed hard enough that Denise turned around. Noah grinned. Finally, someone here appreciates serious planning language. Caleb, walking several steps ahead, glanced back. Keep him focused, Brooks. I've known him 40 minutes. Then you still have time. Noah and I worked easily together. That was all. He mentioned an ex-boyfriend while describing a restaurant, complained about dating apps without lowering his voice, once asked if my sweater was expensive or if I just had the posture of a man with good knitwear. I liked him. More than that, I liked how uncomplicated it felt to be liked by him. There was no hospital attached to Noah, no memory I could damage by touching it wrong. At a Friday project reception, we ended up talking near the windows while everyone else circulated around architectural models and glasses of wine no one really wanted. Noah told me about a disastrous conference in Phoenix. I told him about a client who had once rejected the word blue because it felt too aquatic. He laughed and touched my arm for half a second. Across the room, Caleb was speaking with Maya and an investor. He looked over, not long enough to be obvious, long enough for me to notice. 10 minutes later, he left. Maya wandered over. Did Caleb leave without saying goodbye? Apparently. Weird. He usually does 3 rounds of goodbyes like somebody's grandmother. Noah followed my glance toward the door. That your boss? One of them. He always that cheerful? You think that was cheerful? No, I was being diplomatic. You're bad at it. Occupational hazard. Later, while we waited for our coats, Noah leaned against the wall. Can I ask something mildly intrusive? You can. I reserve the right to lie. Fair. He nodded toward the ballroom. Is there something going on with you and Monroe? No. My answer came too quickly. Noah's eyebrows lifted. That was efficient. Because there isn't. Okay. There really isn't. Elliot. What? I said okay. I looked away. The coat check attendant handed me my scarf. Noah took his coat and added, more gently, for what it's worth, I wasn't asking because of you. I looked back at him. What does that mean? You look at him like you're trying to solve a puzzle. He pulled on his coat. He looks at you like he already knows the answer. I slept badly, not because Noah had told me something I didn't know, because he had made it visible. Until then, whatever existed between Caleb and me had felt private even in crowded rooms. A bottle of water. A remembered sentence. A peppermint left beside his elbow. Small things no one else would understand. The idea that someone else could see the pattern made it feel less safe. Monday morning, Caleb helped by becoming impossible to find. He sent comments through Maya, joined one meeting remotely from an office 2 floors below. At lunch, I saw him cross the lobby, notice me near the elevators, and change direction toward the stairs, with enough subtlety to insult both of us. By Wednesday, I was angry. Not hospital angry, not even romantic angry, if such a category existed. I was angry because for weeks, Caleb had been teaching me that ordinary things could be trusted. Disagreements, jokes, shared work, attention without demand. Then, the second someone else seemed to notice, he vanished behind professionalism like it was a locked door. That afternoon, I passed his office. The door was open. He was alone. Our eyes met. For 1 second, I thought he might say my name. Instead, he looked at the clock. You're going to be late for Maya. I stopped in the doorway. You've been avoiding me. His hand went still on the page. Elliot, no. Don't answer now. Apparently you're very busy. I walked away before he could respond. By Friday, avoiding Caleb had become exhausting enough to feel like work. The irony was that he was doing most of it. He answered every email, gave useful notes, attended every meeting where his name appeared on the calendar. Then, the moment a room emptied, he found somewhere else to be. I told myself I should appreciate the clarity. Instead, every retreat irritated me more. The following Thursday, a community meeting ran late and badly. A contractor had changed the delivery schedule without warning, meaning residents learned before we did that a main entrance would be blocked for almost 2 weeks. Denise was furious. The residents were worse. By 8:30, we had apologized, revised the access plan, and promised a written update by morning. Most of the team left in groups. I stayed to stack chairs, because I needed 10 minutes where no one asked me to explain anything. Caleb stayed too. He didn't speak until the last folding table was against the wall. You handled that well. I handled the part after your contractor created a preventable problem. Not my contractor. Your name is on the door. That line again. It continues to be useful. Outside, the air was sharp enough to sting my nose. We started walking toward the train without discussing whether we were walking together. For half a block, neither of us spoke. Cars moved through wet intersections, tires hissing against pavement. Finally, I said, Noah asked if something was going on between us. Caleb's jaw shifted. I know. How? He asked me too. I stopped. What did you say? That nothing was going on. Efficient. You said the same thing. Apparently we're very aligned strategically. Elliot. What? This is exactly why I've been giving you space. No. You've been disappearing. He looked ahead. There's a difference? Yes. Space is something you give someone after they ask for it. That landed. Caleb slowed. We had reached a quieter block where the stores were closed, and our reflections moved beside us in dark windows. You're right. I had prepared myself for an argument. The apology annoyed me by being effective. That's all? Would you prefer I defend a bad choice? A little. I had material. Sorry to waste it. I laughed once. Then the laugh disappeared. How much do you remember? His expression changed. From the hospital. I know what you mean. Then answer me. We stopped beneath the awning of a closed pharmacy as fine rain began to fall. Caleb looked toward the street. Your mother had a blue overnight bag. My breath caught. It wasn't an overnight bag. You kept calling it one. It was a tote. Blue canvas. One strap was frayed. He glanced at me. You put her glasses inside it, then took them back out 5 or 6 times. I suddenly felt cold in a way the weather couldn't explain. You remember that? Yes. Why? Because you were holding them like you were afraid putting them away made something final. I looked toward the traffic light at the end of the block. I had never told anyone that. I had barely understood it myself. Caleb remembered the silent weather report. He remembered me calling my aunt twice, because the first time I couldn't make myself say the words. He remembered me apologizing to a nurse for asking the same question 3 times. He remembered that I kept checking my phone, even after everyone who mattered already knew. Then he said, You told me if you stood up, you had to leave. I closed my eyes. And you told me not to stand up yet. Yes. You stayed until morning. Yes. Why? This time, he looked directly at me. Because you were alone. That can't be the whole answer. At first it was. Rain tapped against the awning. Caleb rubbed one hand over the back of his neck. My father was upstairs that night. Arrhythmia. They were keeping him for observation. My brother was driving in from Indiana, but he wasn't there yet. Was your dad okay? Eventually. He nodded. I had been sitting there for hours feeling useless. Then you came out of that hallway looking like somebody had removed the floor and forgotten to tell you. His mouth tightened. Sitting with you was the only useful thing I knew how to do, so I was a distraction. No, Caleb, you were a person who shouldn't have been alone. Something in his voice made the rest of the street feel farther away. Did you ever think about me afterward? He took too long to answer. Sometimes. When? When I passed that hospital. He looked almost embarrassed by the admission. When my father had follow-ups there. Once when I saw a man sitting alone in an emergency waiting room and realized I was looking for your face. He exhaled. Not every day, Elliot. I didn't build a fantasy around somebody I met for one night, but I wondered whether you got home. Whether someone was waiting there. Whether you stopped saying you were fine when you weren't. I swallowed. No one was waiting. His eyes lifted. My aunt stayed a week. Friends called. People brought food. Then everybody went back to their lives, which is what people do. That isn't what I asked. I know. The honesty came out before I could stop it. No one stayed. Silence settled between us. Caleb moved half a step closer. Not enough to touch me. I could smell rain on his coat and peppermint from the meeting. I wanted him closer. The realization arrived without drama. Clean. Terrifying. Elliot. I looked at his mouth. He noticed. Of course he noticed. For one suspended second, neither of us pretended this was about the hospital anymore. Then Caleb stepped back. I can't. Heat rushed into my face. Right. That's not. You don't need to explain. I do. Please don't. You work here. I laughed once. Excellent observation. I'm serious. So am I. I'm a managing partner. I'm the executive sponsor on your largest project. Maya is my boss. That doesn't erase the power difference. The worst part was that he was right. Nothing has happened. No. Then what exactly are we protecting ourselves from? The fact that I wanted something to happen just now, that shut me up. Caleb's voice remained steady, but I could see the strain in his face. And I'm not going to let that become something you have to calculate around at work. I folded my arms. There's a restructuring coming. He looked surprised. Maya mentioned strategy may move under the new communications division. It is. Probably next month. And you wouldn't have oversight? Not operationally. Probably is doing a lot of work there. I know. I hated how reasonable he was being. I hated more that underneath the frustration was relief. He wasn't rejecting me. He was refusing to make me carry the risk of his position. You always this responsible? No. Good. It's annoying. I've heard that too. We started walking again. At the next corner, my train entrance was to the left. Caleb's parking garage was straight ahead. We stopped. I should have said goodnight. Instead, I asked, if we didn't work together. Caleb looked at me. The traffic light changed behind us. For several seconds he said nothing, and the answer was already there. Then he glanced toward the station stairs. That's exactly why I need to go home. He walked away before either of us could make the night harder to undo. For 3 days after that, Caleb and I behaved like men who had agreed not to touch a live wire, and then discovered the wire ran through every room we entered. Nothing had happened. That was the official truth. We respected it with exhausting precision. He sat across from me in meetings. I sent him drafts through proper channels. When he made a joke, I allowed myself exactly the same amount of amusement I would have given anyone else. The problem was that now I knew what restraint looked like on him. I knew the slight pause before he said my name. I knew why he left rooms too quickly. I knew that when he stood beside me during a presentation and kept both hands in his pockets, it wasn't because he was cold. Mercer Street entered the stage where everyone suddenly remembered a deadline they should have mentioned 6 weeks earlier. We were preparing for a financing committee, rewriting the neighborhood website, and fielding questions from residents who had every reason to distrust optimistic timelines. The work gave me somewhere to put the energy I refused to call longing. Caleb and I were effective together. Maybe too effective. I would begin an answer in a meeting, and he would know which document to pull up before I asked. He would challenge a phrase, and I would already know which word had bothered him. Maya noticed. So did other people. Nothing inappropriate happened. But offices do not require evidence to produce theories. They only require patterns. The first comment was harmless. One of the architects passed me in the kitchen. Monroe really trusts you with Mercer. He trusts the work. The architect raised both hands. That's what I meant. Maybe it was. A few days later, someone from finance joked that if I wanted a budget approved, I should send Elliot in first. I laughed, because not laughing would have made the comment larger. Caleb wasn't there. I didn't tell him. I didn't need protecting from 2 stupid comments. I had spent 15 years in offices. I knew how to survive being noticed. The following Monday, Maya asked me to close her door. She had a printout in her hand, and the careful expression managers wear when they're about to deliver information they wish belonged to somebody else. Before you panic, this is not bad. You know saying that creates panic. Fair. She put the printout down. Partner assignments are shifting on Mercer Street. Daniel Reed is taking over as executive sponsor. I stared at her. Why? Caleb requested it. Something in me went still. He said Reed's financing background makes sense for the next phase. Does it? Maya hesitated. That was enough. Maya, it's not a demotion for you. Nothing about your role changes. That's not what I asked. She leaned back. I think Caleb is trying to make sure your work stands on its own. The sentence hit exactly where it was designed not to. My work already stands on its own. I know. Does he? Elliot. Did anybody complain? Not that I know of. HR concern? No. Then why is he making personnel decisions around me? Maya looked uncomfortable. You should ask him. I was already standing. I planned to. I found Caleb in the model room, studying a scale section of the courtyard. He looked up and knew immediately. Maya told you. Apparently everyone gets to be consulted except me. He set down the ruler in his hand. That isn't what happened. Then help me out. Reed is qualified to take over. So are you. Yes. Was there a complaint? No. An HR concern? No. Anything? No. My anger sharpened because he wouldn't lie to make himself look better. Then this is about us. He said nothing. Caleb, there have been comments. There are always comments. You're new here. I'm 38, not 19. I know that. Do you? He inhaled slowly. I didn't want anyone deciding you had access to me, that other people didn't. So you decided for them. I removed the question. You removed me from the decision. His expression shifted. Your role did not change. That's not the point. I was trying to protect your credibility. The words were out before he could stop them. I laughed. There was nothing funny in it. There it is. Elliot. You don't get to decide what I can survive just because you were there once when I couldn't. Caleb went completely still. For 1 second, I wished I could take the sentence back. Not because it was untrue. Because I saw exactly where it landed. His face lost all argument. You're right. I had expected resistance. That's it? No. But it's the part that matters. He stepped away from the model table. I should have spoken to you before I changed anything that affected how your work was perceived. I told myself I was removing a risk. I didn't ask whether you wanted it removed. You keep doing that. Doing what? Deciding that caring means getting there first. Fixing the thing before anybody else can touch it. His jaw tightened. I know. Do you? Yes. His voice was quiet now. Someone spent 8 years trying to tell me. That stopped me. Caleb looked toward the windows. My ex used to say I could make a plan for anyone's crisis except my own. He said being loved by me sometimes felt like being managed. A small, humorless smile. I thought he was being unfair. Then he left, and I had a lot of time to discover he wasn't. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to ask more. Another part was too angry to turn his vulnerability into an excuse. I'm not him. I know. And you don't get to practice being better by making choices for me. I know that too. I left before the conversation could become gentler than I was ready for. The next 2 weeks were painfully civilized. Daniel Reed took over the partner role. Caleb did not reverse the decision to prove a point. He did not try to corner me and explain himself again. He respected every boundary I gave him. Emails stayed about work. Meetings stayed about work. When we disagreed, he treated my opinion exactly as seriously as before. No retaliation. No sudden coldness. No questions about my performance. No attempt to recruit Maya into repairing things. I had wanted control back. Caleb gave it to me so completely that I began to understand why control and comfort were not the same thing. The project kept moving. The new Mercer Street campaign tested well with residents. Denise sent me a photograph of Mr. Alvarez standing beneath the restored union notice, looking deeply unimpressed by our entire profession. Noah asked me to dinner once, casually enough that I could have said yes without drama. I told him I wasn't available. He studied me. That sounds less like scheduling than you think. Mind your business. I am. My business is avoiding emotionally unavailable men. I recognize the symptoms. I laughed. The joke followed me home. The problem was that I had spent weeks accusing Caleb, correctly, of refusing to let me choose. But I had done something quieter to him. I had kept him frozen in the first role he occupied in my life. The man who noticed. The man who stayed. The man who knew what I needed before I could say it. I knew how his father had frightened him 6 years ago. I knew almost nothing about what Caleb did when he was afraid now. I knew his ex had left partly because Caleb would not let himself need anyone. I had never once asked what needing someone looked like for him. On a Wednesday morning, Caleb's office was dark. I noticed before I meant to. By 10, his calendar had been cleared for the week. Maya mentioned it while reviewing a presentation. Daniel's covering the partner meeting. Caleb's father is having a cardiac procedure tomorrow. My pen stopped. Is it serious? They expect it to go well. He's taking a few days. She moved to the next slide. I didn't. That afternoon, I sat at my desk long after everyone else had gone. There was a glass of water beside my laptop. This time, I had poured it myself. Across the office, Caleb's chair sat empty behind dark glass. For 6 years, I had remembered the man who stayed. For the first time, I had to decide whether I knew how to be one. I didn't make the decision to go to the hospital all at once. I made it in pieces. First, I closed the Mercer Street deck. Then I packed my laptop. Then I stood in front of the elevator, while my mind produced every reasonable argument for going home. Caleb had not asked for me. His father's procedure was private. Showing up could make everything harder. The doors opened. I almost stepped back. Then I remembered a man sitting 3 chairs away from me 6 years earlier, asking for nothing, and somehow giving me the first hour of that night I could survive. I stepped inside. The hospital was not the same one. I was grateful for that. This one was newer and brighter. All glass walls and pale wood pretending fluorescent light could be gentle. A volunteer directed me toward the cardiac waiting area. I found Caleb at the end of a row of chairs, elbows on his knees. Phone hanging loose between his hands. His coat was folded beside him. His hair looked as though he had pushed his fingers through it too many times. No meeting to run, no problem to solve, no one asking him for an answer. He looked up. Elliot? I lifted the bottle of water I had bought downstairs. I come bearing a highly advanced medical intervention. For a second, he only stared. Then something in his face loosened. You came. I did. You didn't have to. I sat beside him and put the bottle on the chair between us. You don't have to be thirsty. Caleb closed his eyes. A small laugh escaped him, but when he opened them again, they were wet. He looked away quickly. That line is getting old. Still works. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The television showed a cooking program with captions. A family across from us shared crackers from a plastic bag. Somewhere behind the double doors, a machine chimed twice. My body knew the language of waiting rooms too well. This time, I wasn't trapped inside my own loss. I could simply sit. Finally, I asked, "How is he?" The procedure took longer than they expected. That doesn't answer the question. No. Caleb rubbed his palms together. They had trouble controlling the rhythm. They think they've stabilized it now. The cardiologist is supposed to come out when they finish. You talked to your brother? He's driving in. You eaten? He gave me a look. Right. Stupid question. I had half a granola bar. Heroic. His mouth twitched. Then the expression disappeared. I hate this. No polished version. Just 3 words. I know. No, I mean, he looked down. I know what to do when somebody else is scared. I can organize things. Call people. Ask questions. Make lists. Sitting here is useless. That sounds familiar. He glanced at me. You once told me not to stand up yet. I nodded toward the chairs. So maybe you don't have to do anything yet. Caleb looked at the water between us. His voice dropped. I'm scared. It was the first time I had ever heard him say it. Every instinct in me wanted to fix something. Promise his father would be fine. Find the doctor. Make the waiting shorter. Instead, I let the sentence exist. I'm here. His shoulders dropped a fraction. A doctor came out about 20 minutes later. Caleb stood so quickly that the water bottle tipped sideways on the chair. His father was stable. The procedure had been successful, though they planned to keep him overnight. Caleb asked 4 precise questions, nodded at every answer, thanked the doctor twice. When she walked away, he stayed standing. Sit down. He did. For a while, he covered his face with both hands. I looked toward the windows and gave him the privacy of not pretending I hadn't seen. When his hands dropped, he looked embarrassed. Don't what? Turn this into something you have to apologize for. He leaned back. You make that sound easy. It isn't. I took a breath. I owe you an apology too. Caleb looked at me. What you did with Mercer Street was wrong. I know. I'm not apologizing for being angry. I didn't think you were, but I kept you in a role that wasn't fair either. You were the man who stayed, the man who noticed things, the man who knew what to do when I didn't. I liked that more than I wanted to admit, but I never really asked what happened when you were the one who didn't know what to do. His expression softened. I kept asking you to treat me like an equal. I wasn't doing a great job of returning the favor. Caleb stayed quiet for a moment. My ex would enjoy this conversation. Should we call him? Absolutely not. I laughed. This time he did too. The laughter faded, but the warmth stayed. I'm sorry, he said. For Mercer. I waited. I told myself I was protecting your work. I was also protecting myself from having to ask what you wanted and risk hearing an answer I couldn't control. That sounds unpleasantly self-aware. I've had 2 weeks. Productive use of suffering. Very efficient. Then his face changed. I didn't fall in love with you that night. I went still. Caleb looked directly at me. I didn't know you. You were a grieving stranger who needed someone to sit down. That was all. He swallowed. But I never forgot you. The waiting room seemed to narrow around us. I told myself the same thing in reverse. I said, that you only mattered because it was the worst night of my life, that anybody who had been kind to me in that hallway would have become important. And then I met you when nobody was dying. A small smile touched his mouth. You were irritating. I've heard that. You disagreed with my work. You disappeared when things got complicated. You made a decision for me that made me furious. This is going well. You made me laugh. You listened to people who couldn't offer you anything. You admitted when you were wrong. I looked at the water bottle between us. That night made me remember you. I looked back at him. Ordinary days made me love you. Caleb stopped breathing for a second. The old instinct told me to soften it, make a joke, give him an exit before he could choose one himself. I didn't. His voice was quiet. I love you too. Nothing dramatic happened. No music rose. No world changed shape. Just the strange relief of truth, finally occupying the space we had been organizing ourselves around for months. Caleb reached toward me. Stopped before touching my hand. I smiled. Still being responsible? Trying. Good. I turned my palm upward. He took it. We stayed that way until his brother arrived. 3 weeks later, the restructuring became official. Brand strategy moved under the new communications division. Maya took a broader leadership role. Caleb no longer had operational or project authority over my position. Daniel stayed executive sponsor on Mercer Street. Caleb didn't engineer a way back onto the project. That mattered. The first time he kissed me was on a Friday evening after work, nowhere near the office and nowhere near a hospital. We had dinner at a neighborhood restaurant where the tables were too close together and the waiter kept forgetting which wine belonged to whom. Afterward, we walked 2 blocks in cold wind until Caleb stopped beneath the awning of a closed bookstore. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked, "Are you sure?" I laughed softly. "You've been asking me that with your face for 6 weeks. I'd like a verbal answer." "Yes." He kissed me slowly, one hand at my jaw, no urgency, no claim. When he pulled back, his eyes searched mine. "Still sure?" "Caleb." "Right." I kissed him again. By spring, Mercer Street received final approval. Mr. Alvarez came to the announcement and told us the redesigned courtyard was less terrible, which Denise said was probably the closest thing to praise any of us would get. Caleb and I were not magically good at relationships. He still tried to solve problems I hadn't asked him to solve. I still said I'm fine when the truth was more complicated, but now he noticed. And sometimes, I corrected myself. One Tuesday morning, I woke from a dream about my mother. Nothing dramatic. In the dream, she had been in her kitchen, asking me where she had left her glasses. I woke before I could answer. The feeling stayed with me through breakfast, through the train, through the lobby at work. Caleb found me near the elevators before our separate meetings. "You okay?" The old answer was already there. "Fine." I stopped it. "I'm having a bad morning." He nodded. No fixing. No questions I hadn't invited. "Do you want me tonight?" "Yes." "Okay." That was all. A week later, his father had another follow-up appointment. Caleb texted me afterward. "He's fine." "I'm not." "Exactly. Can you stay tonight?" I read the message twice. Then I smiled. For years, I believed the most important thing Caleb ever did for me was stay beside me on the worst night of my life. I understand now that staying through a crisis was only the beginning. Love was in the ordinary mornings, the disagreements, the apologies, the glasses of water left beside laptops, the moments when one of us admitted we were afraid, the days when either of us could walk away without punishment. Maybe being loved wasn't finding someone who would never leave. Maybe it was finally trusting someone enough to notice that, today, they had chosen to stay.